In the vast wilderness of Montana, where autumn paints the Glacier National Park in gold and crimson, a veteran wildlife photographer had spent decades chasing the perfect photo. At 42, Matthew Harrison sought one last meaningful shot to reignite his fading passion. Patience rewarded him with a sighting, a tiny, vulnerable bobcat kitten, weak and alone by a creek. But as Matthew documented the small, struggling animal, he felt something impossible, a gentle touch on his back. Turning slowly, he found himself face to face with the mother bobcat, her amber eyes holding not with aggression, but with the steady, unnerving gaze of a mother seeking help. The mother bobcat seemed to plead, urging the human towards a hidden danger. What could drive this solitary predator to seek human help? What tragedy awaited in the depths of the forest? This is a story of trust that defies instinct, of boundaries crossed in the name of compassion, and of a photographer who discovered that sometimes the most powerful images are those we choose not to share with the world. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., but Matthew Harrison was already awake, staring at the wooden ceiling of his rented cabin. Sleep had been elusive, as it often was these days. Even here, miles from Seattle's constant noise and relentless pace, the quiet seemed almost too profound, a reminder of how disconnected he had become from the natural world. Matthew swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for his glasses. At 42, he'd been a professional wildlife photographer for nearly 2 decades, his work appearing in National Geographic, Wildlife Conservation, and countless other publications. Yet lately, his photographs felt hollow, technically perfect, but lacking the soul that had once defined his work. "Just get through this assignment," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his graying hair. "Maybe then you'll find whatever it is you're looking for." The cabin was simple but comfortable, a small bedroom, bathroom, and a combined kitchen living area with large windows overlooking the Montana wilderness. Outside, dawn was just beginning to break over the distant peaks of Glacier National Park, painting the sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold. Matthew had arrived 3 days ago, despite the protests of his ex-wife Karen and their daughter Emma. "Dad, Montana in October? The weather's unpredictable and you'll be all alone," Emma had argued during their last video call. At 19, she was studying environmental science at the University of Washington, following in her father's footsteps in her own way. "I'll be fine, Em," he had assured her, though the concern in her eyes made his heart ache. Since the divorce 5 years ago, their relationship had been strained at times, with Emma caught between her parents' separate worlds. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and a protein bar, Matthew gathered his equipment. His trusted Canon EOS R5 with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, a smaller camera for broader shots, extra batteries, memory cards, a collapsible tripod, and various filters. He packed these carefully into his weatherproof backpack, along with water, trail mix, jerky, a first aid kit, and a satellite phone. A concession to Emma's concerns. The morning air was crisp and sharp in his lungs as Matthew locked the cabin and set off down the trail. The rental property was about 4 miles from the eastern boundary of Glacier National Park, nestled in a valley that local wildlife often used as a corridor. According to his research, this area was home to a small population of bobcats, and spotting them, particularly capturing photographs of mothers with kittens in their natural setting, would be the highlight of his current project on North American wildcats. Matthew's editor at Wildlife Conservation had been skeptical. "Bobcats are notoriously elusive, Matt. Are you sure you don't want to focus on something more accessible?" But Matthew had been adamant. Something about these solitary, resilient creatures resonated with him. Perhaps it was their independence, their silent strength, or simply that they represented a challenge, a chance to prove he still had what it took to capture truly remarkable images. The first mile of his hike followed an established trail, but soon Matthew veered off onto a game path, barely visible among the fallen leaves and undergrowth. He moved slowly, carefully placing each foot to minimize noise. Wildlife photography required patience above all else. The willingness to wait hours, sometimes days, for just the right moment. By mid-morning, Matthew had reached a small clearing near a creek where he'd previously spotted bobcat tracks. He set up his blind, a small camouflaged tent designed to conceal him while allowing his camera lens to extend through a narrow opening. Then he settled in to wait, camera at the ready. Hours passed. The forest around him hummed with life. Chickadees flitting between branches, a squirrel chattering angrily at some unseen threat, the distant hammering of a woodpecker. Occasionally, Matthew would snap a photo, more to stay alert than with any real artistic intent. But mostly, he waited, his mind drifting between memories of past expeditions and worries about his future. The divorce had been amicable enough, but it had left him questioning everything. Karen had simply grown tired of his absences, the weeks spent in remote locations chasing the perfect shot. "I feel like I'm married to your camera," she had said one night, her voice weary rather than angry. And that's not enough anymore. He couldn't blame her. He'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, parent-teacher conferences, all for the sake of his work. And now, approaching middle age, Matthew found himself wondering if it had been worth it. His colleagues praised his technical skill, his eye for composition. But when was the last time he had truly felt connected to his subject? When had photography become less about passion and more about deadlines and magazine spreads? A subtle movement at the edge of the clearing snapped Matthew back to the present. He tensed, finger hovering over the shutter button. There, a flash of tawny fur among the undergrowth. He held his breath, waiting. Slowly, cautiously, a small form emerged from the bushes. A bobcat kitten, no more than a few months old. Its spotted coat was a perfect camouflage against the dappled forest floor, and its tufted ears swiveled alertly as it surveyed its surroundings. But something was wrong. The kitten moved with an unsteady gait, occasionally stumbling as it made its way toward the creek. Matthew's heart raced as he captured frame after frame. This was the moment wildlife photographers lived for. A rare, intimate glimpse into the life of an elusive creature. But as he zoomed in to check his focus, concern replaced his excitement. The kitten appeared thin, its coat dull, and when it finally reached the water's edge, it collapsed rather than drank, lying limply on the mossy bank. For a moment, Matthew hesitated. The cardinal rule of wildlife photography was non-interference. Nature, however harsh, should be allowed to follow its course without human intervention. But something about the small, vulnerable creature overcame his professional detachment. Slowly, he emerged from his blind, camera still in hand, but now forgotten. He approached the kitten with extreme caution, expecting it to flee at any moment. But it remained motionless, save for the rapid rise and fall of its tiny ribcage. "Hey there, little one," Matthew whispered, kneeling a few feet away. He snapped a few photos, documenting the kitten's condition. Up close, he could see it was severely dehydrated and possibly malnourished. Where was its mother? Bobcat kittens typically stayed with their mothers until they were nearly a year old, learning to hunt and survive in the wild. Matthew set down his camera and reached for his water bottle, considering how he might help without causing more stress to the already struggling animal. That's when he felt it. A soft, almost imperceptible touch on his back. He froze, every instinct screaming danger. With glacial slowness, he turned his head to find himself face to face with a full-grown female bobcat. Her amber eyes, unnervingly intelligent, were fixed on him, and her powerful body was tense but not in the predatory crouch he expected. Time seemed to stop as human and wildcat regarded each other at point-blank range. Matthew's mind raced through everything he knew about bobcat behavior. They were generally shy, avoiding human contact whenever possible. An encounter this close was practically unheard of and potentially dangerous, especially with a kitten involved. Yet the female made no move to attack. Instead, she did something that defied everything Matthew thought he knew about wildlife. She gently touched his arm with her paw, then looked toward her kitten with what could only be described as desperation in her eyes. "This can't be happening," Matthew whispered, his photographer's instinct making him wish desperately for his camera, now just out of reach. The female bobcat touched him again, more insistently this time, then took several steps toward a dense thicket beyond the clearing, looking back at him expectantly. With a glance at the weakened kitten, Matthew made a decision that went against all his training and experience. He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and followed the bobcat. She led him deeper into the forest, occasionally pausing to ensure he was still following. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline making his senses hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. This was madness, following a wild predator into unknown territory. Yet something compelled him forward. The female's behavior was so deliberate, so unlike anything he'd ever observed, that his curiosity overrode his caution. After about 10 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly dense underbrush, the bobcat stopped beside a fallen log. Matthew heard it before he saw it. A pitiful mewling sound that made his heart clench. There, caught in the metal jaws of a spring trap, was another bobcat kitten. "Oh God," Matthew breathed, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. The mother hadn't been threatening him. She had been asking for help. Somehow, this wild creature had recognized that a human might be able to save her child when she could not. The trapped kitten was in obvious distress, its small leg crushed by the steel teeth of the trap. The mother moved beside it, gently grooming its head in what seemed like an attempt to comfort it. Then she looked up at Matthew, and he could have sworn he saw tears in her eyes. "I'm going to help," he said softly, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might convey his intentions. "But you need to give me space. I don't want to hurt either of you." To his amazement, the mother bobcat backed away several feet, settling on her haunches to watch him warily. Matthew approached the trap slowly, assessing the situation. It was an older model leg-hold trap, likely set illegally as trapping was strictly regulated in this area and required specific permits. The kitten hissed weakly as he knelt beside it, but made no attempt to bite or scratch him. Its small body trembled with fear and pain, its trapped legs swollen and bleeding. "Easy, little one," Matthew murmured, reaching into his pack for his multi-tool. "This is going to be okay." He had never disarmed a trap before, but the mechanism seemed straightforward enough. A powerful spring holding the jaws closed. Using the pliers on his multi-tool, Matthew carefully compressed the spring, feeling the resistance against his hands. It took all his strength, his arms shaking with effort, but finally, the the jaws loosened enough for him to pull the kitten's leg free. The moment it was released, the kitten tried to scramble away, but collapsed almost immediately, too weak and injured to move far. The mother approached cautiously, sniffing her injured young, then began licking the wounded leg. Matthew retreated a few steps, giving them space. He took his canteen and poured some water into the cap, then set it near the kittens. "It's clean," he said softly. "It might help." To his surprise, the mother bobcat approached the makeshift water dish and lapped at it briefly before nudging her injured kitten toward it. The kitten drank weakly while Matthew rummaged in his pack again, finding the small first aid kit he always carried. It wasn't designed for wildlife, but it contained antiseptic wipes that might help prevent infection. "This might sting," he warned, slowly extending a wipe toward the injured kitten. The mother watched intently but made no move to stop him as he gently cleaned the wound. The kitten whimpered but remained still, perhaps too exhausted to resist. When he finished, Matthew sat back on his heels, watching the small family. The second kitten's injury was serious but not immediately life-threatening. With the mother's care and if infection could be avoided, it had a chance. But there was still the first kitten, alone and weakened by the creek. As if reading his thoughts, the mother bobcat stood and trotted back in the direction they had come. Matthew followed at a distance, and together they returned to the clearing where the first kitten still lay beside the water. The reunion was heartbreaking in its tenderness. The mother gently nudged her weakened kitten, encouraging it to rise, but it could barely lift its head. Matthew, keeping a respectful distance, opened a packet of jerky from his pack and tore off tiny pieces, tossing them near the bobcats. "It's not ideal," he said, "but it's protein. Might help until you can hunt again." The mother cautiously sniffed the offered food, then ate a piece. After a moment's consideration, she picked up another piece and placed it directly in front of her weakened kitten, who managed to eat it slowly. For nearly an hour, Matthew sat quietly, observing this extraordinary interaction. He took a few photos, unable to resist documenting what must surely be one of the rarest human-wildlife encounters ever witnessed. As the day began to wane, he realized he needed to head back to his cabin before darkness made the forest trail treacherous. "I have to go," he told the bobcat family, feeling oddly as though they might understand. "But I'll come back tomorrow. I'll bring more food, maybe something better for the kittens." The mother bobcat watched him gather his equipment, her amber eyes following his every movement. Before leaving, Matthew left his remaining jerky and filled his water cap one more time. The hike back to his cabin was a blur, his mind reeling from the day's events. Had that really happened? Had a wild bobcat actually sought his help? It defied everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. That night, sitting at the small kitchen table with his laptop open, Matthew reviewed his photos. They were remarkable. Intimate, raw, and unlike anything he had ever captured before. There was something in the mother bobcat's eyes that transcended species boundaries, a universal parental desperation that any human could recognize. But as he stared at the images, a troubling thought formed. If he published these, revealed the location, what would happen to the bobcat family? Trappers might intensify their efforts in the area. Well-meaning but intrusive wildlife enthusiasts might search them out, disrupting their recovery and natural behaviors. For the first time in his career, Matthew found himself questioning the purpose of his work. Was documentation enough? Or did he have a greater responsibility to the subjects whose lives he captured through his lens? Sleep eluded him again that night, but for different reasons. By dawn, he had made a decision. He packed his backpack with supplies, high-quality cat food from the small general store down the road, clean water, and a more comprehensive first aid kit that included antibacterial ointments safe for animals. The forest seemed different as he hiked back to the clearing, more alive, more connected. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every bird call, felt like part of a conversation he was just beginning to understand. When he reached the creek, he half expected the bobcats to be gone. The previous day's encounter nothing more than a strange, beautiful anomaly. But they were there, huddled together beneath a large spruce tree at the edge of the clearing. The mother rose as he approached, her posture alert but not threatening. The injured kitten's leg was clearly still painful, but both kittens seemed slightly stronger than the day before. "I brought something better," Matthew said, keeping his voice low and gentle as he unpacked the cat food and set it on a flat rock. "This should be easier on their stomachs than jerky." Over the next week, Matthew fell into an unexpected routine. Each morning, he would hike to the clearing, bringing food and checking on the kitten's progress. The mother bobcat grew increasingly comfortable with his presence, eventually allowing him to sit just a few feet away as her kittens ate. The weakened kitten steadily regained its strength, while the injured one's wound began to heal, though it still favored its other legs. During this time, Matthew took few photos. Instead, he found himself simply observing, learning the subtle communications between mother and kittens, the unique personalities of each cat. The injured kitten was bold and curious despite its wound, often the first to approach the food Matthew brought. The other was more cautious, staying close to its mother, watching Matthew with solemn eyes that seemed too old for its young face. In the evenings, he would call Emma, sharing carefully edited versions of his days. "I'm getting some great material," he told her, not quite ready to reveal the truth of his extraordinary experience. "You sound different, Dad," she said one night. "More, I don't know, present? Like you're actually there and not just thinking about the next shot." Her observation struck him deeply. She was right. Something had shifted in him. The constant drive to capture, to document, to prove his worth through his work had quieted. For perhaps the first time since he'd picked up a camera professionally, he was experiencing nature rather than just recording it. On the morning of the 8th day, Matthew arrived at the clearing to find something unexpected. The bobcat family waiting at the very edge of the tree line, almost as if they had been watching for him. The kittens were both standing on their own, the injured one still limping but clearly stronger. The mother approached him directly, something she had never done before. She came within arm's reach, then sat, her amber eyes meeting his with an intelligence that took his breath away. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Matthew said softly, understanding instantly what this visit meant. The kittens were recovered enough to travel, and staying in one place for too long was dangerous for wild bobcats. As if in confirmation, the mother bobcat rose and gently headbutted his arm, a gesture so reminiscent of a domestic cat that Matthew almost laughed. Then she did something that would stay with him forever. She placed one paw on his knee, holding his gaze for a long moment before turning back to her kittens. With her family gathered around her, the mother bobcat looked back at him one last time, then led her kittens into the forest. Matthew watched until the last flash of spotted fur disappeared among the trees, his heart full of an emotion he couldn't quite name. Joy tinged with loss, wonder mixed with gratitude. Back at his cabin that evening, Matthew sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in breathtaking colors. His camera sat untouched beside him. There would be time for photographs later, other assignments, other animals. But what had happened with the Bobcat family was something he would keep private, a sacred exchange between species that transcended documentation. His phone rang, Emma's name lighting up the screen. "Hey, Em," he answered, his voice warm. "Dad, are you okay? You've been weird all week." Matthew smiled, looking out at the darkening forest. "I'm better than okay. I think I finally found what I was looking for." Which was... He thought about the mother Bobcat's eyes, the trust she had placed in him despite every natural instinct, the connection that had formed between them in their shared concern for her kittens. "A reminder," he said simply, "of why I started doing this in the first place. It's not about the perfect shot, Em. It's about being part of something larger than yourself, even just for a moment." There was a pause, then Emma's voice, softer now. "I'm glad, Dad, really glad. Will you tell me about it when you get back?" "Yeah," he promised. "But not just tell you. I want to show you. This summer, maybe we could come back here together. There's so much I want you to see, really see, not just through photographs." As they talked, making plans for a future trip, Matthew felt a presence. He turned to find the mother Bobcat sitting at the edge of the porch steps, watching him calmly in the gathering darkness. "Em, I've got to go," he said quickly. "I'll call you tomorrow." Hanging up, he slowly set his phone aside and faced the wild creature who had changed something fundamental in him. She wasn't alone. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows, were her kittens, both standing strong. "You came to say goodbye properly," Matthew whispered, overwhelmed by the gift of this final visit. The mother Bobcat blinked slowly, that universal feline gesture of trust and affection. Then, as silently as they had appeared, the Bobcat family turned and vanished into the night, returning to their true home in the wild. Matthew remained on the porch long after they had gone, his heart full. Tomorrow, he would begin gathering his equipment, preparing to return to Seattle. But he would be bringing back more than photographs. He would be bringing a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper connection to the natural world, and a story that, though it would remain largely untold, would guide his work and his life in the years to come. For now, though, he simply sat in the stillness, honoring the trust that had been placed in him and the extraordinary bond that had formed between a man and a wild creature in need. A bond that had healed them both in ways neither could have anticipated.